day I was in the office and the manager of the motor pool, called up and said, "Bill, we we're all trying to figure out how you got pig poop in the back seat of your car." And so I had to tell him the story, and he laughed. Yeah, I like small town Montana. I'll tell you just a quick story because uh, uh, alumni directors are supposed to tell stories, and we all learn from stories. But I I chaired a national conference. We met that year in San Francisco, and these are alumni directors from all over the United States, foundation directors and communication directors. And I was the chair, and I had five, myself included, five-member committee that organized all aspects of it. And it was we met in February, and one of the people on the committee was from Reno, and she skied. And come to find out, four of the five of us skied. I said, okay, after the conference is over and we can debrief, we're going to do that in Reno, and we're going to go skiing and just have a fun time, a couple days, our own expense. So we get to Reno, and all the way we all drove, we carpooled, so we're in one car. I kept talking about Montana. Everyone in Montana knows each other. Everyone in Montana knows each other. And so Ross from Kentucky was so tired of hearing that. As we were skiing, we skied up to the lift line, and he said, "I'm gonna prove you don't know everybody in Montana." So there's two gals ahead of us, and he just said, "Excuse me, do you know anyone in Montana? My friend here is from Montana. He thinks he knows everybody in Montana. I'm gonna prove him wrong. Do you know anyone in Montana?" And this one lady said, "Well, the only one person I know in Montana is Gina, and she met her husband in a wedding. They fell in love, got married, and she moved to Montana." And I said, "Gina's husband is Steve. They live in Libby." And and this gal's face her eyes just lit up and like, "What?" She said, "How do you know that?" Well, it turned out that Steve was his family, my family were next door neighbors. Only person in Montana that I knew that had met his future wife at a wedding from California was Steve. So I just threw it out, and the chance is one whatever, it's very small odd that it would be the right person, and it ended up being that. So Ross was fuming. He just was so upset that here he tried to say I didn't know everybody, and the first person I did. If you fast forward about 5 months, I met my brother-in-law's wedding in Denver, and I met some people from Kentucky. I made the comment, "Well, I really only know one person in Kentucky, and he lives in Murray, Kentucky." And they said, "Oh my God, we're from Murray." I said, "Well, he works at the university, and his name is Ross." And I said the last name, and they looked at me and they said, "That's our son's soccer coach." I said, "Well, would you do me a favor when you get back? Would you please be sure and tell him that you met Billy from Montana?" And so they did, and my phone rang off the phone, or my phone rang at the office on Tuesday when I got home back to the office. And Ross was like, I won't repeat what he said, but it was like, "How in the hell do you do this?" And I said, "Well, it's Montana. It's just we always ask where people are from and try to make connections." And so I always like telling that story. Perhaps I spent too much time telling it now, but
No.
it is important for Montana. They always say we're one long main street, yeah, across the state, and it's true. You don't know who's related by marriage or by blood to someone else, and so you it's easy to find somebody in Malta or Plentywood or um, uh, Weibo, places as far away from Missoula almost as you can get in the state. You can still find somebody that is a mutual friend and
Oh, yeah.
important to
Yep.
our success. It is a big state and few people, and they love the idea that we probably had more cows than people in our state. And it was always fun to represent the state and the university that way of getting to talk about Montana and getting people excited about Montana. And that's what the ambassadors do. They, you know, you can have a professional recruiter help you recruit businesses, and that's very important. And I'm not playing that down. But when you have people that have lived in Montana, are from Montana, or are here by choice, they're talking about the benefits of the state. It makes a difference. And when they're volunteers, they're very persuasive and they have a valid point of view. They're not doing it because it's their job. They're doing it at their own expense in many ways, in many times, at many times.
Yeah. Well, that's one thing that I absolutely love about the ambassadors is the wealth of experience there. I mean, when there's you just see it regularly, people making the connections between each other to get people in front of the right people in each community. I think that's super cool. I'm excited for the future of everything that's going on, and I'm excited to see kind of weirdly through kind of this COVID situation where the ambassadors are kind of feeling like more of a state unit than as like completely individualized as we were when we were meeting, by town. Coming from the side of seeing where those networks help out, what do you think could be grown that would help the state kind of take business to the next level or open some of the doors to more people?
Well, I think the key office would for assistance and support, and we've worked very well with this office over the many years in different administrations, is the governor's office of economic development. You can't go out and try and you have a love for the state of Montana, you want to help. You hear of a company that wants to move to Missoula or to Kalispell, to Great Falls. You need to know what the regulations are. You need to know who's going to help get over all the obstacles that might be in front of you or them. And the governor's office of economic development over the years has done a very good job of that. Some better years than others, but you need an anchor in the system, in the bureaucracy, that can help you, because we can't do it. We can't be on the outside trying to figure out the regulations, or can this be an incentive? Can you overcome that disincentive? You need somebody being your champion. And the governors have worked hard to support those offices. There's always uh, the ability to expand it, uh, but it has to be balanced with the other needs of the state. So I really, if you want to try and do something, you can't just go to Seattle, run into a CEO that says, "Hey, I'm interested in Missoula, Montana," and then on your own say, "Okay, I'm going to devote 24/7 to help you do this," because you
Right.
don't know what you don't know, and that's when you look around and network. And you mentioned the network of Montanans that are the ambassadors. That's also a very strong point of this program, is that we have attorneys, we have business owners, we have government officials, we have teachers, we have just a whole variety of careers and occupations that we can call on for advice, or uh, can you tell me who I need to talk to in this
Yeah.
administrative office that would know what we're trying to do, and I don't have to go from ground zero. And so ambassadors helping ambassadors has been a very important part of our success.
Yeah, just the stories really abound. They kind of always blow my mind. I was lucky enough to have a dad that was kind of a network champion of his own back in the day, and I've met people in other states that knew my dad from rodeoing and from college football and stuff, and it's kind of a it's awesome. It
Oh,
really is.
it really is. And we were in Ohio at a football game, and a guy came to the tailgate, and he asked me. We were visiting, and I asked him where he's from. He told me, and he said, "Where are you from originally?" And I said, "Libby, Montana." He said he worked in Libby, and this is an older gentleman. This is in 1989 or 90. It was just when I started, and he said he worked for the lumber mill in Libby. And I said, "Oh, well, my grandfather had moved out. He died. My dad was only 13, but he had moved out to Libby with the family that had the sawmill." And he said, "Was was that Jim Johnston?" And I said, "Well, yes." And he said, "Well, he knew him. He my grandfather, of course, I never met him. My dad was only 13 when he passed away, but they my grandfather was older and this guy was a little younger, but they had met. And it was incredible that somebody had actually knew my grandfather when we have so few stories and so little knowledge about who he was. But it's just if you take the time, people say, well, that is so kind of a coincidence. But if you take the time and visit, you find that there are some ties and that you may not even, I mean, how would I ever know that guy lived in Libby
Hmm.
that we started to visit? And I said I was from Libby. And if you just ignore people or don't interact because you don't want to or afraid to, that you would have had that same experience. You just didn't know it. You
Yeah.
didn't have opportunity. So I
Well,
uh,
we
I talk
export
too
so
much,
much.
and our
Oh,
son always gives me a bad time about just blurting out who I am and where I'm from. But I notice he networks very well as well. So I
yeah.
think he sees the advantage of that.
I always used to laugh because I used to, when I was younger, I used to roll my eyes because dad would go, basketball games were the worst. It would take at least 45 minutes to an hour to walk out of the basketball game. And I never quite got it. But as I've started to kind of grow up a bit myself, I'm like, well, I definitely inherited his gift of gab, and I get the value in it now for sure. And it was always cool. And apparently, from the stories that I've heard, my grandpa was kind of similar as well.
Well,
So
it's a nice trait to have transferred by generation. The other thing I think that I knowing you and then by extension your dad then and grandfather was that your networking is authentic, is genuine. You are interested. You're not doing it to find out who they are and make a little note in a notebook or a spreadsheet that will remind you down the road who they are and why you had that conversation.
I'm horrible with
You really want to
spreadsheets.
know who they are, and
Yeah.
uh, Dory and Eric, my wife and son, if we went to the mall or went to dinner, people would always stop and ask questions, and I had a hard time saying, well, this is our Sunday brunch or this is our dinner night together, and I need some personal time. I had a hard time not being able to say that. And so Dory and Eric would just continue to walk. And they didn't do it rudely. They'd wait for a little bit, but they would continue to walk. And I could say then, I need to catch up with my family. Can I give you a call on Monday? Or
Hmm.
can I give you a call tomorrow and we can finish this conversation? Because if we didn't do that, our whole evening was work.
Yeah.
I Everything was work for me. As the alumni director, every time you went somewhere, people they had a wanted to say something good about the university, had a concern about the university. But as Mike Montgomery, the basketball coach, told me one time, he went on to coach at Stanford. He said, whether they stop to praise you or criticize you, they're interrupting the day. I mean, they're not being malicious. It's just you don't have any time to yourself. It's always something. And after retiring, I realized that you were on 24/7. Just no matter where you went, that people knew you as the alumni director. They know you as a professor. They know you as the president. They know you as whatever, a business owner. That just is don't really walk away from those roles.
You were probably one of the biggest things that brought me kind of fully into the ambassadors once we moved down to the Bitterroot, uh, because you were always down to take a meeting or sit down for a coffee and chat. And even those situations, just having somebody in a town that's willing to meet with you. I mean, I've realized in days past, how awesome that was, and how I probably by no means deserved it. But
You
but
certainly did. You certainly did. And I think uh, I remember meeting you perhaps the first time at a ambassador's reception at Montech. And I mean, you were so engaged and so excited and so interested that I thought, this and young,
mhm.
there's now that
I
I'm,
think I might have been like 24 at the time.
which believe me, at my perspective, that's very young now. So uh, then that's one of the things you know, for a while, the ambassadors were all of kind of a certain age, a certain part of their career, and kind of thought in many ways the same. And now, what I'm really excited about is I learn so much from everybody that I interact with. It's the the ones that just started their careers and how they see it, the younger voters that when they describe their concerns or what they feel is the right direction and think, I really wouldn't have thought of that perspective, but now I'm hearing it and I learned from that. So I just did an interview. Our bank, First Security Bank, has a program called Follow the Leader, and I had the opportunity to interview leaders in Missoula and ask them about their view of how to become a leader. It's only 90 seconds, so it's not an in-depth conversation. But the one we just did this week, the person I was interviewing I said, well, who is your mentor? Who's your leadership mentor and why? And her response was, well, and I won't say the name, but she is my mentor and she is 29 years old. Now, the lady I'm interviewing is closer, probably younger than me, but closer to my age. And for her to identify that the person giving her, um, the coaching on how to be a strong leader is 29 years old. And I thought that was, well, you could say, well, my leader, the somebody that's been in politics for 40 years or whatever. But here this lady was saying, 29-year-old, and I agree. Uh, our son is about that same age, a couple of years older, and to listen to him analyze political positions and programs, it's very helpful because sometimes I want to say yes, but, and as soon as you hear yourself wanting to think yes, but, then you need to shut up. There is no yes, but. Yes, but if you understood this, you'd understand that. But that's not their frame of reference. That's not their reality. That's your reality. And
Hmm.
who says you have the right reality? So don't, if I find myself saying yes, but, I immediately stop and apologize. It that doesn't help the dialogue at all.
I feel like I'm trying to do that more.
Well, I think that there's a new group of ambassadors, and you're included in that group that uh, they have an energy, they have a perspective, they have a dedication to better our state, and it's a shared vision, and you just have to all come together collectively to understand what it can be and how you get there. It can't just be a single person's vision that drives everything. We have political leaders that obviously carry a lot more weight than others, but it is where we're living. It is our state, it's our businesses, it's our livelihoods that are being impacted, and we all need to have a feeling of being involved in that. And if you don't, you see things that are happening now that people rise up in ways that are very negative, and
Hmm.
that's that's unfortunate.
It
But I
is.
think a lot more people are closer to the same position than you realize. I mean, you can be so
Hmm.
extreme on either end that you actually meet on the other side at
Yeah.
times.
Yeah. Yeah. It's very interesting because I think at a lot of points people have very similar values, and their way of expressing them tends to come and put them on opposites when, like you said, it really comes out of a core uh desire for the same thing or to see the same thing. I've kind of always said I feel like Montanans, there's a social responsibility is I guess what I called it when I was younger. But like if you're in a parking lot in Florida and your car dies, there's nobody in the parking lot that's going to help you jump your car. I can just attest to that because the amount of times that I blew people's minds by jumping their car when they needed help is like it warms my heart, those
Yeah.
remembering like back to those reactions. The security guard cannot help you because they can't take the liability of trying to help you jumpstart your car. And so people will be sitting there waiting for somebody that they know to drive from 2.5 hours away to come help them get a jump start in a mall parking lot. And for as widespread and as big of a place as Montana is, um, I don't know many people that roll up and go, "Hey, what's your political views before I go and help you jumpstart your car?"
No, exactly.
I think people are always kinda out to help. Um, and especially in the situations when you're looking for the good things, you see so much of it, so much of it. And maybe that's like growing up in a town of 400 where it's like, yeah, life was pretty safe for us. There wasn't a whole lot of, you know, crime. I think the biggest thing that ever happened was somebody got a dirt bike stolen, you know, and it was from somebody that was coming through town, kind of the thing. And so, yeah, you get a lot of situations where there's so much good in this state, and people have so much. There's a million of us. We have so much more impact as individuals than people realize, and it's phenomenal.
I agree, and I think the challenge now is that people are so worried about why are you coming up? Why are you offering to help? You know, you almost need a badge of an endorsement saying, "I'm a good person. I'm going to help you." There's not an ulterior motive of why I'm doing this. I think, to your point, I think if you asked people, I bet you pretty much 9 out of 10 wouldn't even know what a jumper cables are because they never had to use them or know what they are. You know, you
Yeah.
call AAA or you call somebody to come out and help. But I think most Montanans carry jumper cables in their trunk. You never know when you're going to need them
Oh
to
yeah.
help or to be helped. So that is interesting. Yeah.
Yep. I mean that your jack, your spare tire, maybe.
The toe chain.
Yep.
I so I'm thinking. I told you now you're getting me on stories. So I at the university, the car I liked to drive when I was on the road recruiting in the wintertime was a little Dodge Horizon, and it was a very small car. And I was always traveling by myself, but I liked it because it was front wheel drive,
Mhm.
and it just got me through every kind of road condition there was. And one of the rules when you're a state employee, you can't give other people rides that aren't state employees. In fact,
Right, because they have to be insured.
signed up for insurance and all that to have
Mhm.
passengers. And so I'm traveling between two small towns in eastern Montana, and it was a back road. But I knew where I was going. I knew how to get there, and I come up, and here's this truck stopped, and they have this hog in the back, and I mean, there's a blizzard going, and as Montanans and others that know, hogs can't hold their heat. They can't be out in the weather like that. So I stopped. I mean, I hadn't seen anybody else on the road, so I knew that no one else was coming along. So I stopped and asked him if I could help, and he said, "Well, there's nothing I can do with the hog. I'm just going to have to, but I have a flat tire. I need to get the tire to Fort Benton and then back on the truck so I can get this hog into the shelter." Said, "Well, there's no one else coming, I'm sure. So let's figure out how we can do it." So I crammed everything I could in the trunk of the car. And we literally, if it hadn't been flat, we'd never gotten this big tire in the back of this little car. And the tire had come from the barnyard. So you can imagine what it looked like. So I gave,
Pristine.
yeah, pristine. Yeah, it was. So I got him to Fort Benton, dropped him off. His father-in-law lived in Fort Benton, was going to give him a ride back, and so everything's fine. And the hog was probably going to be fine. And so that was on a Thursday night. On Friday, I go back into Missoula, drop my car off at the motor pool, and Monday I was in the office, and the manager of the motor pool, called up and said, "Bill, we we're all trying to figure out how you got pig poop in the back seat of your car." And so I had to tell him the story, and he laughed. He said, "We would never guess that. We just, we it smelled like a barnyard, and we couldn't figure out how that would happen in the back seat of the car." And I said, "Well, it was because of the tire, and of course the tire was covered with snow and everything else. And when it got warm in the car, of course, it started dripping on the floor. And I thought afterwards I should have left a note for him that why, because I'm sure they're looking at that going, how could this young kid, what is he taking
Kind of shenanigans.
here? What's going on? I'll
Yeah.
stop those stories.
Oh, no, I mean, other than the fact that I'd probably hold you over longer, it's always fascinating to me. I love it. We have an oral history of Montana that, I mean, being dyslexic, I'm not a huge reader, and so I know that from my uncle, I know he's read, I swear, every book on Montana anything. So I know that there are a lot of stories written down, but if it's there's just something to be captured. I feel like those stories, those passing moments, um, because they don't go on like they're not a big deal. We always called it like when I was in high school, we called it karma banking. Just it's just you do the right thing because it's the right thing to do. And
Exactly.
if you're lucky and, maybe one day you're in a bad situation and somebody gives you a hand and that's karma banking, basically. Do the right thing because you never know when you might need an extra hand. And you never want to be that person that's been on a negative on your karma bank and then needs a hand with stuff because,
Yeah.
you
Oh,
know,
I agree. And I think what for Montanans, if you need help, sometimes it's hard to let other people help you.
yeah.
We're so we're so as individuals, individualistic. But uh, if you truly need help and people come to help you, it means a lot. I had a truck early on. I had a truck in college, and when I first started working was single, I had a truck, and I don't know how many people I helped move with my truck,
Right.
friends and friends of friends, and it's just something to do. I mean,
Yeah.
it doesn't cost you anything. You're we're moving apartments to apartment in Missoula, whatever. Well, it comes time that I'm now married and we're moving out of our apartment into our first home, and I'm just doing it by myself because I didn't want to call anybody and ask them for help. I mean, part of it was we were taking loads in the evening. We're both working,
Hmm.
but when we got to the big stuff, it started getting to be a little hard. Well, one of my friends found out that we were moving and said, "Why aren't you asking us for help?" I said, "Well, I didn't want to bother anybody, weekends." And he said, "Bill, you moved half this town. You got to let them help you." So on his initiative, he called our mutual friends and said, "Hey, we," and so the next day, all these people show up, and it was so simple. And they all chastised me for, "Why didn't you call?" It's because I have a hard time asking people for help. I could have done it slowly till, it'd been a little harder getting the bigger pieces, but maybe I had to call then. But one day, maybe in a 5-hour period, we were done where I just didn't feel comfortable asking for help. And I've learned people appreciate being asked.
Yeah.
And in the alumni world, we'd always say, "We're going to ask you for help. If you don't have the time, or if it's inappropriate, or you're not interested, if you just would tell us, we won't
Hmm.
bug you about it. But we don't want you wondering why you weren't asked to help the university because we are asking. And if you want to, great. And if it's not appropriate, let us know." And we understand there's time commitments, there's interest, things that will dissuade people from doing a project. But we always asked,
Yeah.
and I've learned to it's okay to ask if you need to. So I think Montanans will have a hard time
Yeah,
dying up.
I could see that coming out of COVID. It's going to be an interesting time. I hope that things go well for everyone, I guess.
Yes.
Um, so I think to wrap up, maybe I'm like, I don't know that this is going to be a short question either. Um, I was going to ask you what a couple of your favorite projects were through the years with the ambassadors, but I think in the sense of time, maybe we can hit on a couple of the high points of the ambassadors through the era that you've been in it, and then tell me a little bit more about RecCon.
Well, the some of the projects, the receptions where we saw people come together in cities like Denver and Minneapolis. I'm thinking of an event in San Francisco where we specifically targeted bio biotech firms
Mm,
because
hmm.
they're easily uh, uh, transferred to a state like Montana, where with enough bandwidth you could run the business in Montana, in Missoula, in Helena, in Bozeman, and you didn't have to be in the Silicon Valley. You didn't have to be
Hmm.
in San Francisco. So we had this unbelievable, a very nice reception at a yacht club in the San Francisco Bay. It was next to the San Francisco Yacht Club, and a very prominent billionaire had applied for membership and was turned down. I'm not sure why you'd turn a billionaire down. So he bought
From the ambassadors or from the yacht club?
from the yacht club. Yeah, no, we would have taken him right away. So this billionaire buys the little marina next door, buys the land further out, and builds this huge, beautiful clubhouse, and we happen to have ties to that individual, and so we were one of the first groups that got to use this palatial new, um, right on the water. Everyone wanted to go to it, so the interest is high. We were Montana ambassadors. That was attractive for people, and we were talking about biotech. So all this came together, and it was just it was a real memorable. And some of us the settings. I don't want to overplay that, but it was people excited about the opportunity to come to Montana and have a different quality of life, and us being there to say, hey, we'll help you with the connections. We're here to help you. Just all those things came together. It was a fun evening, a nice event, and it actually produced quite a bit of activity. Now, not everything happens in the end because there's lots of obstacles at times, but it did pay off, and it was fun to see that. RecCon. RecCon is recreation in Montana, outdoor recreation, and so we five ambassadors came together, six now came together, and we formed a foundation to promote outdoor recreation in Montana. And we did it because at a time there was some political positioning of the state of Utah and the recreation industry that had the largest conference of the type in Salt Lake City decided to move. And our state was very actively trying to get that conference somewhere in Montana. And we found that all the available space, even in Billings, our largest city, if you combine everything available for display, maybe it'd be scattered all over the city, wasn't enough for this conference. And so we couldn't bid on it, we couldn't get it to come. And Jeff Wright actually was the major push on this. He said, well, why do we have to go for the largest conference ever? Why don't we just have a conference?
Hmm.
And it wasn't fitting in the pegs of people's interest. And so we decided we'd do our own nonprofit foundation and we promote it. So in 2018, we incorporated the foundation. In 2009, yeah, 2019, we had our first rec recon, we call it, and we had it here in Missoula, and we invited uh, people that customize boats and campers, people that have backpacking gear they produce. They came from all over Montana. We had Billings and we had Thompson Falls. I'm thinking of people. I think we had people from Sydney that had something unique they wanted to show. And so and you visited, and we appreciate that. You were new in the Montana Ambassadors at the time. You
Hmm.
came out to see. So it was great. Well, 2020, it wasn't going to work with all the COVID restrictions and concerns. And we're having a meeting this coming a week from tomorrow, actually, to make a decision. Can we have it in 2021? Are we going to be far enough along with immunity and vaccinations that we could safely gather? It's hard to invite thousands of people and then say you can't. You
Hey,
got to
we're
stay
postponing. Yeah.
apart. And how do you sanitize if you're looking at a camp trailer
Yeah, you're walking
or
into somebody's
vehicle?
home.
How do you go through it one person at a time and then have to sanitize everything to let the second person in? So if we don't feel that we can offer it, we're probably not going to do one in 2021, but look for us in 2022. But it was our way of helping that industry, and so, it's there's a group called Van Lifers that they actually did show up in 2020 because they were going to join with us. They have a national tour where they have these gatherings, and we combined them so they would be both the same time here in Missoula. And they continued to do theirs, but it was a much smaller event. And
Hmm.
so that's what Recon is. We're a nonprofit and just promoting the Montana. And some people don't want Montana promoted because if you're trying to fish the river, your hometown
Yeah.
area obviously know how crowded it gets on the rivers. But people make their living on that, and
Yeah. Well, and it's unfortunate too. I feel like in my world, I see the tourism marketing as being part of that challenge. We have specific places that get a heavy amount of tourism marketing. And every year when I talk to the agencies to go do shoots or go do photos, they're like, we need these places that are out in the middle of nowhere. We need more of these small towns. We need more of places that are like off the beaten track. And like for example, this year, I was talking directly with the contacts at the agency, and they were like, we have nothing from Yak and Eureka and Troy and Libby, Thompson. Well, no, not quite to Thompson Falls, but that whole area outside of the park, there's just nothing there. And so Carrie and I went and spent two full trips up there. One was the 10 Lakes um, up outside of Eureka, and that was beautiful. And that was we'd planned that one already, and then we did a second trip up, and it was super cool to see some of those places and to go on some of those roads. There was nobody there, even though the parks were seeing completely record attendance. And when we got back, there was zero interest in the photos from that trip. And I literally checked off like the checked off their actual like request list. And they came back to me with one requested photo, and it was a photo that I hadn't even sent them, and it was of Glacier. Well, it was of Pole Bridge, but and I'm like, how do we bridge that gap? I mean, Retcon obviously. I can say this: it has at least had one positive effect because Carrie and I went to the one this year and the year before, and I now have my van that I'm working on building out.
There
So
you go.
and
There you
and we bought it locally, so it's I know it can be a challenge right now for anybody to find a high top of any kind.
go.
So I think placement and timing wise, you're right on the spot. So I hope that you guys maybe a fall of 2021.
Well, yeah. It doesn't. We've been focusing on July, but maybe it is going to be fall or just before it turns cold in later fall, pre-winter. But yeah, I think that's important. I tell the story of my father. They camped all the time. They had actually just a camper on the back of their truck. I'd go camping. I'd take my tent and we would camp and fish and uh, so I would get off work. I'd drive up to Libby again, my hometown,
Hmm.
and I got in late. I knew where they were, so there was no problem. I pull in, and first thing my dad said was, "Man, it's getting crowded out here. It's hard to camp anymore." And I said, "Well, Dad, I just drove in. I saw one outfit, one rig a mile back." And my dad honestly said, "That's my point. They're within a mile of us. We don't have our own space." It's like, "Oh my gosh, Dad, the next camping group is a mile away and you think it's crowded. Like,
Hmm.
you need to go some other places." But
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, Carrie and I have definitely ended up more and more looking at because I mean, that's the thing is we'd already decided that like we're not really that interested in doing international travel. Like Carrie has conferences that she'll end up speaking at, so we'll like we had our first trip to Switzerland, so we postponed that, or it got postponed. So we were just going to tack a week onto that. So she'd do the talk, you know, go to the conference, and then we just spend a week like exploring. And other than that type of stuff, where it was just it teamed up or lined up with work, we were like, we've been just driving every weekend in the truck for the last 3 years anyway. Why don't we just keep like exploring Montana to the fullest? And there's so much here. I mean, we're down in the Bitterroot, so we're down in the southern, you know, corner. But it's like you can drive 8 hours in almost any direction and still be in Montana.
and it's so different. I traveled extensively for work for 30, almost 37 years, and I don't travel for work now. But I would tell people say, "Well, how many countries you've been to?" And I've been to many countries, and I've all those experiences are great. And they say, "Well, we don't want to travel internationally. We want to see the state, in the United States." And said, "Well, I've also been to all 50 states. I mean, that was important to me. I wanted to be in all the U.S.
Mm.
states, and I've been all over Montana. So I appreciate local being Montana. I a little larger, the United States, but it's fun to also travel in the world to see
Yeah.
how different. Then you realize, when I was in the Middle East, I realized that when you read about Israel, that Israel is only the size of New Jersey. And when you're talking about mortars being fired from one group at the other, you're talking Stevensville to Missoula
Yeah.
distance. It's not something happening in Atlanta, Georgia, to Missoula. And when you realize the congestion and the centuries of relationships or strife, I mean, you get you don't really understand it just reading the articles. When you see that, it makes an impactful image for you. So I think a lot of people, it's okay if you don't want to travel. I happen to be a person that I appreciate being at home and gardening or taking care of my lawn, but I like to see where other people live and what it looks like, and get your hands dirty.
Yeah. And I guess so we're not anti-travel. Um, what our choice was instead of doing a, a few big trips each year to somewhere really far away, we wanted to weekend after weekend explore and get the most out of our time. We fully intend to, like, as we get older, start traveling further out. We're
Mhm.
just in that spot of like, all right, here's our Carrie's new to the well, newish to the state. She grew up in North Carolina. And so we've made trips back. I've gotten to see a little bit. Like, I'm really excited to go spend falls or a fall here and there on the East Coast just because I think it'll be absolutely stunning. Um, we're both still addicted to larch season, so we're usually here and chasing stuff during the yellow season. But yeah, we're excited. I mean, I think the more you get out, I really think that anybody that grew up, I mean, I grew up in a town of 400. My graduating class, the biggest class in the history of the high school, with 30 people, and 14 of them were kids that I had in my first grade class. So like in seventh or eighth grade or whatever, we had 14 kids in our class. We were like one of the small classes. And when you go and have people, so I probably still have people that were in my graduating class that haven't left the state. And that is mind blowing to me. But when you grow up in a town like that, you have to get out to appreciate it. You have to go spend some time where you realize how unique those interactions and how unique that small town feel is. And like, kind of to your point, you have to get out to realize how open it still is. We're always at a spot where, like, you're in a spot where, you move to a place because you can get a job, and more people move there because they can get jobs. And you know now I don't have to drive 30 minutes to the movie theater. Weirdly enough, I have to drive like 40 if I want to go to the Missoula movie theater now. So I'm even further. But in Twin, it was, you had to drive 30 minutes to the nearest McDonald's, 40 minutes. I've lived in cities where it takes 30 minutes to get to the nearest McDonald's or movie theater, but it's not because it's 40 miles away. It's because you have to drive through traffic, and it could take 40 minutes. It could take 2 hours
Yeah.
to get that same distance. And when you get to come back to that, to the point where we're talking about miles instead of time, or time and miles being kind of an equal thing, I think it's the reminder that keeps you positive, because you remember how truly, open Montana is. You're actually seeing Montana as that, like, the out of state person coming and moving in and seeing all of the opportunity and the wonder that's there versus, being here long enough to have maybe Montana glasses on it.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that your clarity on what your goals are on travel. The Travel's not for everyone. You don't have to travel. The ones that do travel do see things. Maybe they see things that are different. Doesn't mean they change their behavior or their opinions, but they get a chance to see different things. I remember maybe in the sixth grade or seventh grade being asked, um, how many states we've been in. And I realized I'd only been in Montana. I mean, on the weekends, we'd go camping and
Hmm.
we loved it. I mean, that was a great way to grow up, but I really didn't have a sense of what anything else looked like. My grandparents, my grandma lived across the alley from us. My grandparents on the other side lived in Plains, Montana. So 120 miles was about as far as I ventured from home into, late grade school, early junior high. And I just, when I started traveling, I just took advantage of seeing other things. And it doesn't mean it's better than where we are. But you're absolutely right. When you're in a large city, urban setting, it's how many minutes, not miles. And minutes to miles is almost the same here in Montana. And we celebrate that. It's a nice thing to be able to do is that you have the opportunity to do that. So, and again, I don't talk about my travel unless people ask because it sounds like, wow, good for you. You've been in all these countries, but I also say it was for work too. Part of my job as alumni director was we did go to visit alumni in other countries and made repeat trips to for fundraising and other reasons. But so I got to count it as work and a
Hmm.
personal experience.
It's
But
the best when you get to link those
yeah,
trips.
but it also meant I'd say, well, lucky you, and I said, well, it also means I have to drive to Two Dot in a snowstorm, and I don't have a choice of that either. So not that Two Dot isn't a great community, but anytime it's a
A little
snowstorm,
out there.
well, in Montana it can be harrowing. So
Well, all right. I think I'm gonna wrap it up with that spreadsheet comment. I've got my I've got my shop pencil here, which is the only pencil I have on my desk.
uh,
I'm gonna ask you for a request for who I should chat with next. I'm trying to do at least one of these a week. My goal is to do 4 of 'em a month. I'm like, just in my head, I was thinking about how long that'll have me doing this, and I'm like, well, that should keep me busy for like the next 3 years if I don't miss a week. There's the part of me that wants to provide value for other people and be like, here, we're going to go down a list and talk to people about what they do and what's the opportunities for them to connect and stuff. But the other side of me is like, I just kind of want to have a conversation.
well, so Dory and I, we're very social. We're all very social in different
Hmm.
ways, but we miss that interaction, and um, I can't imagine this without a support group that you can talk to on the phone or Zoom or it's just we're so isolated right now, and we're just I think especially Montanans, we're social people.
Yeah.
We, whether it's a group activity or a couple good friends, you just are used to being around people.
Yeah, I definitely agree there. And especially in the winter too, where it's, when you're driving to work typically in the dark and you're coming home from work in the dark, it's
Yeah.
yeah, I mean it's a challenge for sure. Like, and now at least I've got a long-term plan.
Well, I'll send you some more names, and thank you for this project. Thanks for all you do in
Oh,
many different things in Montana, but especially being so involved with the ambassadors and taking such an interest and being a thought leader. And I'm excited that you're now on the board. Is that?
yeah.
And I think this is your term, right?
Yep, I'm doing my best to do a lot of listening this year.
Well, I timed
Keep my
off
mouth
as
shut
you
as much as possible.
were. So I timed off the board just as you were coming on. I would love to
Mhm.
serve with you, but I know you're going to do a great job and really appreciate that. And you're a good friend. I
Thank
really I like your perspective. I mean, we don't talk politics necessarily. Just talk. So that a lot of stuff is neutral about economic development, and we have the same mindset. And you have a different perspective. That's important. And I really thrive on hearing those and listening uh, to those. So in the interviews that I've been doing with the leadership program I mentioned through the bank, and it's called Follow the Leader. uh, when I ask what the essential skills are, uh, in some form, it's always listening. You 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 can't go in and say, "Well, I have all the answers, and so I'm not going to listen to you." If you're really a leader, you listen, and and you don't get out in front of the supply chain because you have to be grounded to what's happening around
Yeah.
you. You don't watch and listen. You will be blindsided and you'll make a wrong decision. So
Yeah. Well, and there's so much history too. I think that's the as I've grown up a bit, that's the more that I've learned is the massive amount of motivated people that have come before you is always massively larger than you have any perspective of when you're young, which is kind of cool. I'm glad to be getting to that point in my life where I can look back at my old self and be like, "Oh, yeah, you didn't know anything. Nothing."
well, I realize how little I know every day, and I go back to when I was associate director of admissions, and I was young, no children, wasn't married or just married, and a lady had had a child and was having a hard time with daycare and was missing a lot of work and was either coming late or called in couldn't come to work, and it was all related about it wasn't the baby was sick, it was all health or childcare. And I
Hmm.
remember sitting down and saying, you have got to figure this out. We can't, you're missing way too much work, it's interrupting our flow. She was also a supervisor but reported to me, and I wasn't very empathetic about her situation. Fast forward a couple years when we have our son, and all of a sudden, the worst call in the morning was from the daycare saying, "We can't take your son today for whatever reason, because someone's sick or whatever." Or the one we used to do a one-on-one, so if she wasn't well, there was no backup.
Hmm.
And I just the terror of that phone call is like, oh my God, what do I do now? And there's not a lot of resources. And I always think back to how um, insensitive I was to that issue till I experienced it myself. And I try and use that in other situations of people's lives are complicated. And just because you haven't gone through it doesn't mean you shouldn't have empathy for what they're doing. I mean, if they're trying to do the best they can and there's things in their way, then we have a responsibility for work and getting things done, but we also have a responsibility as a human being, and someone needs help and some leniency. And if you extend it as far as you can and that's not being they're not they're not appreciative or they're taking advantage of it, that's one thing.
Yeah.
But life is life, and then you realize before you realize that you're retiring, and it all went by too quickly, and it doesn't really make a big difference whether they miss 2 or 3 days because of a daycare problem.
Yeah. It's that, is it going to matter in 5 years?
Yeah, that's a good mantra. What's it going to look like in 7 years, and does this really make a lot of difference? So, hey, listen, I better let you go. I tell you, you turn me on, wind me up, and flip the switch on. I don't stop. So,
Well,
thank
maybe we'll have to revisit it in the future.
redo it or say, well, the second one is so much better than Bill's. We'll have to redo Bill to give him a chance to.
Right? I'll just be in a perpetual loop.
Well, thank you.
Everybody trying to get in. All right. Well, thank you. I appreciate it. I'm gonna switch off of record mode as far as that goes. I'm just gonna make sure I have everything figured out before I let you go or try to stop.